The movie starts, and we see a scared blonde little girl, Anne, sitting next to her bed and praying. Her mom, who's not so mentally sane, comes and tries to open the door. She seems concerned at first, and asks if she's okay, but she slowly starts to get angrier and angrier. She starts hitting the door, and yelling at her to let her in. Anne looks terrified while her mom hits the door, and she continues to pray. Her mom starts hitting the door with her head, and screams at Anne to let her in. She finally manages to break through the door and gets in, while we hear Anne scream. Then we see Anne as a young woman, now a nun, talking to a psychiatrist, a blonde woman called Dr. Peters. She asks her if her mom was fighting with depression, and Anne says yes, she was also dealing with schizophrenia, and she thinks that it wasn't only that, there was something else wrong about her that no one could put a name on. Even as a child, she knew that there was always something more. She would come to her room every night. Sometimes it was her mom who loved her, and sometimes she wasn't. Then we see her mom combing Anne's hair while she looks scared. She hums a song while she slowly starts gathering Anne's hand in hers, and Anne tells Dr. Peters that she would sometimes hit her. Then she would hug her, and say it wasn't her who did all that, it was the voice inside of her telling her to do it. Dr. Peters tells Anne that she's sorry for her mom abusing her, but Anne cuts her off, saying her mom wouldn't abuse her, she loved her. It was the voices inside her who did it, she was possessed. She looks at the doctor with tears in her eyes. We see her getting inside of the school of exorcism in the heavy rain. She sees a group of fathers coming down the stairs to go to the patient ward. One of them, Father Dante, keeps looking back at her while going down. They smile at each other, and Anne looks down while going up the stairs. Then we see them in a class about exorcism, and we learn that they're not allowing women to participate in exorcism. She sits in Dr. Peters' class and asks if she doesn't believe in exorcism. The doctor says that there are legitimate cases of it, but now they can't perform an exorcism on someone without getting their mental health checked by the psychiatrist first. We see Anne walking in the hallway where they keep some of the patients, bringing food to some of them. She looks at the patients from the tablets that show the security cameras. She gets into an old man's cell, whose name is Clark, and he continues to look blankly at the ceiling whenever she talks to him or when she is giving him food. Then she gets into another room and sees Dr. Peters, talking with two fathers inside. Anne gets in, and sits next to the girl, Natalie. While we hear Dr. Peters saying the girl thinks that her mother is possessed by something, but she believes that the tests they'll do to her will prove otherwise. She leaves the room with the man, and Anne is alone with Natalie. She looks at her paintings and they start talking. Anne gives her a little snack, and Natalie tells her that Anne's the one she loves the most in here. We see Anne in her room when it gets dark. She looks at the comb her mom used to use, and she remembers how she used to abuse her. Anne puts it back in the drawer and gets up to close the windows because of the heavy rain. She sees Natalie from the reflection, but doesn't see anyone when she turns back. She slowly walks towards the door, and sees shadows underneath it. She opens the door, and we see Natalie looking at her in the hallway, but she disappears when Anne looks her way. Then we see her about to get into Natalie's room the next morning. She hears a sound in the hallway, and turns around to look. She sees Natalie right in front of her. When she turns back and she asks if she's okay. While looking at her tired-looking face, Natalie tells her that she doesn't like her room. Anne asks her how she got out. Natalie gives her back the wrapping of the snack she gave her yesterday, after saying she wanted to find her. They hold hands and walk back to Natalie's room. Then we see Anne walking around the school when she hears someone calling for her. She looks around but doesn't see anyone. The voice keeps talking to her, and it sounds like her mother. She gets scared and continues to look around her. She sees a half-open door and starts walking towards it. She looks inside and sees Father Quinn giving a lecture about exorcism. She gets inside and sits next to Father Dante in the class full of men, and starts listening to the voice recording of the exorcism of a woman. Father Quinn tells them to remember that God's words are their most powerful weapon, and he tells them that the people who performed an exorcism on the patient here obviously made some deadly mistake. He asks them what they would do differently if they were the ones who were doing it. And we see Anne in the library, looking at the books and listening to the voice recording again and again, until she catches a word that means voices. She sees someone asking a nun about the main archive, and gets up to get the nun to let her use it, but she can't succeed. She turns back, to go back to her place, and sees Sister Euphemia waiting for her. Then we see them in the staircase, with Father Quinn. The sister asks her questions about the class she snuck in, and tells Anne that women can't perform exorcism. They argue about it for a little and Anne goes away. We see Anne in Clark's room, helping him to clean himself, when we see the IV bag that's tied to his arm getting filled with blood. He starts humming a song, the same song that Anne's mother hummed when she was combing her hair. Anne asks Clark how he knows this song, and Clark turns around to tell her that they've been waiting for her. Anne lifts up the sponge she was washing Clark with, and sees smoke coming out of his burning skin. She gets up and a song starts to play from the speakers in the room. Clark tells her that her mom had a pretty voice, and Anne tries to run out of the room, but the door gets slammed shut and the buttons next to it don't work to open it. Clark appears next to her and grabs her by the throat, telling her to let him in. He grabs her as she tries to push him away, and starts dancing, mostly swinging her around. Anne manages to push him away, saying no, and Clark falls to the ground, looking like he's Clark again. We see Cardinal Matthews watching the camera footage of this while Father Quinn and Sister Euphemia sit in front of him. Sister suggests to send Anne back, but Father Quinn disagrees, and tells the cardinal that he can work with her, he'll teach her how to do exorcism. He says that it's obvious that her relationship with the devil is personal, and it's not going to leave her if she leaves here. Then we see Anne coming into Father Quinn's class. He gets in and tells them that this requires active learning, and tells them to follow him. They get to the patient ward and start walking through the corridors. Father Quinn tells them what to do, while Anne looks at the pictures of the fathers who died when they were performing exorcism. They get to the room and Anne sees Natalie from behind the window. Father Quinn asks for 2 volunteers, and she raises her hand, but puts it back down after the father looks at her. Father Dante and Father Raymond accept to be volunteers, and Father Quinn gets out the things they will need while he tells them what to do. They get inside the room while Natalie sits her back towards them, painting a picture. They start praying, and Natalie turns to look at them, and she looks pissed off. We see her face, covered in bruises and looking purple. Anne gets shocked at the sight of her face, and gets closer to the window. The fathers get closer to Natalie while praying, and she closes her ears with her fingers to not hear them. Then her eyes roll back, and she pushes her fingers inside of her ears, and Father Dante lunges at her, trying to stop her. Natalie gets pulled back to the corner and she climbs up to the ceiling while the lights start to flicker. Father Quinn tells them to continue praying. The security cameras get broken, and the light starts flickering even more. They continue to pray, and Natalie falls to the ground. She starts walking towards the reflective window, and looks straight into Anne's eyes, even though they can't see the ones outside from inside. Natalie closes her eyes with her hands, and maggots come out from her hands. She starts hitting her hands against the window, while yelling at her to let her in. Father Quinn gets inside and he starts praying. Natalie hides under the bed, and we see something crawl up to the bed, under the covers. Father Quinn goes to pull the covers back and sees nothing underneath. Natalie pulls him under the bed and makes him fall to the ground. She gets out with her bones cracking and getting into shapes that no human can do while looking at Anne. She gets inside and tries to talk to Natalie. Father Quinn tells her to stick to the Bible, and Natalie tells Anne that she's scared. Then she falls to the ground, and her hair starts to get inside of her mouth. Father Dante and Father Raymond run to get them out, while Father Quinn tells Anne to pray with him. They start praying, and a hand comes out of Natalie's mouth, holding the hairs, and it goes back inside. Natalie gets up, gasping for air, and starts coughing. Anne goes to her, and Father Dante notices one of her drawings. Then we see him with Father Raymond and Anne, sitting and drinking outside while talking. Father Dante shows them the drawing he got and says he thinks that this was for him. He has a sister who got assaulted and lost her baby. She has been in pain ever since. Then we see Anne back in the room where they performed the exorcism on Natalie. She brings back the things they used and looks through the window. She notices someone lying on the table with a sheet covering them. She gets inside and gets close to the table. She lifts up the covers and sees her mom's body. She hears a sound and turns back to look, but she doesn't see her mom when she turns back. She looks around and looks at the table again. Her mom attacks her from behind and Anne wakes up. Then we see Anne going to visit Natalie. She gets into the hospital room like the room in the school and sits at her bed. Natalie wakes up and tells her that she had a nightmare and tells her what happened as though it was a dream. Then she falls asleep again, and we see Anne talking to Father Quinn about Natalie. Father says they might need to send her to the Vatican if her situation gets worse. Then we see Anne in the library, pretending to look for something. Father Dante makes the nun who's responsible in there go away for some time, so Anne can access the main archive. She gets in and starts looking through the patient's files. She sees that almost everyone who's transferred away has passed away shortly afterward, but she finds one person who got released and finds her interview tape. She watches the tape and learns the woman's story. She shows that a part of her face is missing. Anne takes notes, and we see her talking to Dr. Peters again. Anne says her mom was guilty, and we see young Anne watching her mother yell from the door crack. Her mom comes inside of the room she's in and shows her the comb, and Anne tries to run away, but her mom catches her. Dr. Peters tells her that she's describing a traumatic memory, and it's hard to face these memories. Anne says her mom took her own life, and we see her memory of her mother lying on the ground, blood coming out of her head while she looks at her. Dr. Peters says that it's common trauma to find herself responsible for someone else's actions, and the only way she can disarm those memories is by confronting them. Anne looks at her with tears in her eyes. We see her going to check on Natalie, but her card gets declined and she can't open the door. She asks one of the nuns what's going on, and she says that they restricted access to her, maybe they're transferring her. Anne goes to Father Quinn and tells him that he can't let Natalie transfer. She saw the files and the mortality rates are over 99%. They argue, and Anne says maybe they need to try something different when they perform exorcisms. Then she leaves and runs into Father Dante in the stairs. He tells her that he heard what she said, and there might be a way to prove that she's right. He offers her to use his sister for this. He says she doesn't have much time, and there's still a chance of her living after this. He manages to convince Anne, and we see them going to his house. They get into her room and see her, Amelia, sleeping in the bed. Anne draws a cross on her forehead and she wakes up and starts to scratch her belly. Anne sits down next to her and calms her down. She draws another cross on her stomach, and Amelia suddenly turns towards her. Father Dante explains to Amelia that Anne is here to help her, and Amelia looks at Anne like she's begging for help and tells her that the voices don't stop. Father Dante starts praying, and the ceiling fan starts to turn faster. Amelia starts saying odd things, and the candles in the room go out. Amelia's belly gets bigger, like there's a baby inside, and Amelia asks Anne to help her while the blades of the fan start flying across the room. Anne gets closer and sees a little hand in Amelia's belly. She tries to calm her down and tells her to focus on her voice. She tries to make Amelia let go of the feelings she has. She tells her that no matter what happened to her, that God will still love her and she'll be forgiven after she confesses to herself. Amelia's belly gets back to normal, and the candle lights come back. Amelia hugs Anne and they all start crying. Then we see Father Dante and Anne talking to each other about their past, and we learn that Anne is actually a mother. She got pregnant at 15, and the nuns told her it would be better to give her child away. Then we see Anne standing in front of the mirror in her room with the comb in her hand, and she starts brushing her hair. She has a flashback of her mother hitting her after brushing her hair, and she throws the brush into the sink that's in front of her. She notices something in her eye and gets out a long piece of hair. We see her mom behind her while she washes her eye, but it disappears when she gets back up. Her door gets knocked on, and she goes to open it. A nun tells her that the cardinal is waiting for her, and she follows the nun to go to him. She sees the cardinal, Father Quinn, Sister Euphemia, and Father Dante in the room waiting for her. Cardinal tells her that Father Dante's sister, Amelia, took her own life last night, and her mom told them that she had performed an exorcism on her. He asks Anne if this is true, and Anne apologizes to Father Dante. They talk, and Anne says she should go back to where she came from, St. Mary's, and she leaves the room. We see her in there, and Dr. Peters comes to visit her. She gives her a book, tells her that they released Natalie, and tells her to keep going. Then she leaves and gets out to the garden and sees Father Dante. She apologizes for his sister again, and he says it's okay. He tells her that they brought back Natalie. Her situation worsened, and we see Natalie attacking the people in the ambulance as Father Dante tells Anne that she attacked humans. He says he came because she gave her a necklace. Anne takes it and says that she bought it when she first came here. Then she wrapped it around her daughter's wrist when she was giving her away. Anne turns to Father Dante and tells him that Natalie is her daughter. We see them going to the school in the night, and Father Dante gets Anne to where they placed Natalie. He takes her to the tunnels under the school, and they walk past a pool with holy water. They arrive at Natalie's cell and see Father Raymond with 2 other priests praying in front of Natalie's cell. Father Dante talks to him and tells him to get away from here, but he doesn't want to. Natalie starts talking to Anne, and Anne tells her to let the others go. Natalie doesn't answer, and the light goes off. They hear the cell's door open, and the priest gets thrown to the walls. Father Raymond starts getting dragged, and Father Dante goes after him. Anne follows him and gets in front of him. She finds Father Raymond laying on the ground and checks his pulse. She shakes her head to Father Dante, and they continue walking. They come across Natalie with her face covered in scars, and Anne tries to talk to her. Natalie asks why she left her, and Anne says she's not Natalie, she knows who she's speaking with. Natalie then asks her to give an honest answer as to why she gave her away. Anne says she was 15, but Natalie says it was because she wasn't ready to sacrifice herself for her daughter, like her mom did. Anne says she's ready now, and Natalie runs to hug her. The demon leaves Natalie's body and goes into Anne. Father Dante runs to Natalie, and we see her face getting normal. Anne tells them to run as her face starts to get scars. Father Dante tries to open one of the gates, and he manages to create a space just enough for Natalie to go through, while they hear Anne's screams as the devil takes over her body. He tells her to hide, and we hear Anne running. Father Dante looks around to find Anne, and he sees her on the other side of the door. He tries to talk to Anne to let Natalie go, but she throws him to the wall and starts looking for Natalie. She finds her near the holy water pool and grabs Natalie's neck. Then she hears her mother telling her to let go. Anne sees flashbacks from her life as she hears her mom, and she manages to let go of Natalie while Father Dante tries to break the lock on the door. He gets inside while Anne fights with the demon in her body. She manages to throw herself in the pool and continues to hear her mother telling her to let go, so she does, and the water starts foaming, and we hear a hissing sound. Her body then rises to the top and Father Dante gets her out. She starts throwing up water and coughing. Then we see her in one of the beds in the school, and Natalie comes to visit her with her adoptive mom. She gives Anne one of her paintings, and they hug each other. Anne watches her as she goes with her mom. Then we see her talking with Cardinal, Father Quinn, and Sister Euphemia. Cardinal tells her that they're awarding her with an academic research fellowship in the Vatican and a fellowship in exorcism. They talk, and we see Father Quinn talking with her. He tells her to be careful. Now that she knows the devil also knows her. Then we see her in a taxi. The driver stops at the side of the street and Anne looks out. She sees a woman standing in the middle of the curb and looking at her. Then she hears the driver whispering her name and looks at him. She tries to open the door, but it gets locked. She turns and sees the woman next to the window with her eyes rolled back. She turns around and sees the driver sitting next to her with black eyes. She gets a cross out of her bag and he attacks her. The movie ends there.